Hello and welcome to our webinar series, Succeeding with Forecast Pro. In today's webinar, we're going to focus on the topic of modeling and introduce a new Forecast Pro feature, the Compare Forecast utility.
Hello and welcome. My name is Franklin Ray, and I'm a senior trainer here at Forecast Pro. Throughout my time here, I've helped many companies forecast better using our product. In today's webinar, we're going to go over several scenarios that will help you better model your data. Before we start, let's go over a few housekeeping notes. This webinar series, Succeeding with Forecast Pro, runs once a quarter. The next installment is in February and will deal with item-level comments. At the end of today's webinar, we'll post a sign-up link in the chat. Today's webinar will be recorded and put on our website and YouTube channel for you to view later. Since we're using Zoom for this webinar, remember that you have the chat function at the bottom of your Zoom window. We'll be doing a Q&A at the end, so please enter questions in the chat as they come to you. My colleague James is monitoring the chat and will collect the questions to answer at the end. The agenda for today will start with an overview of how modeling is done in Forecast Pro through our expert selection process. We'll talk a little bit about why you might want to change those models with the goal of improving your forecasts. And then we'll introduce an exciting new tool available in the latest version of Forecast Pro, the Compare Forecast utility. This tool exists to make it easier to select the best model for each of your items. We'll go through several real-world motivated examples that a forecaster might encounter and show how the Compare Forecast utility can be used to help with each of them. Finally, we'll give some conclusions, and then we'll do the Q&A. All right, let's get started.
Let's give a brief overview of how modeling works in Forecast Pro. The primary purpose of Forecast Pro is to model your history. And one of the best features to help with this is our expert selection. But how does it work? When you load data into Forecast Pro, our expert selection process is able to quickly and automatically forecast tens of thousands of items. It selects from a wide variety of models that are able to best fit your data based on its stability, length, seasonality, and other features. And all of these models, from exponential smoothing to Box-Jenkins ARIMA to machine learning, are backed by lots of statistical research. Expert selection will look at features of your data to select the best model choice. And if it finds multiple candidate models, it will run scenario-based tests, often dozens of times for each item in your project, to determine which model is the best fit for each item. If you have even 100 items in your project, that means that expert selection is testing multiple different models at multiple different holdout horizons for each one. That's many thousands of forecasts going on behind the scenes. And when a model is selected, the explanation for why that model was chosen is displayed on the forecast report, as well as the parameters for that model. So if expert selection is working so hard to find the best model, why would we ever want to change it? Well, there are a few reasons. Sometimes the history doesn't tell the whole story, and real life is more than just statistics and numbers. You might want to adjust a model because of internal knowledge, reviewing forecast accuracy, fixing items with outlier spikes in their history, dealing with items that are changing trend or expected to perform differently in the future as compared to the past, or when working with new items that don't have much history. In each case, you're bringing in your own domain knowledge on top of the statistical model. facilitate these decisions, there is a new feature in the latest version of Forecast Pro, the Compare Forecast utility. This tool, available on the forecasting menu, allows you to apply and compare alternative models simultaneously. When activated, the graph, forecast report, and override grid will open and allow you to visually inspect the results of two different models on the same item in terms of the forecast they generate, their model parameters, and how they appear when plotted on your graph. And for the rest of the webinar, we're going to see how this tool can be used.
Now it's time to look at some examples.
Today, we're going to look at 4 examples. There are a few reasons why a forecaster might want to adjust the statistical model on one of their items. The first example will deal with reviewing accuracy. If a choice of model shows evidence of being poor based on the most recent actual data, we'll want to consider trying a new model. The second example deals with outlier spikes. If your items have large positive or negative spikes, then the ability of the model to capture seasonal patterns and trends can be thrown off. As a forecaster, we want to compare our baseline model against models that correct for these outlier events. In our third example, we'll look at a situation in which we want to change the trend for one of our items. Sometimes our data makes items appear to be untrended when they really should be, or trended when they shouldn't be. And here, the forecaster's own knowledge of their markets and their product can be used as the basis for comparing to a differently trended model. Finally, we'll look at new product introduction. Because new products have little to no history, they can be among the hardest items to forecast. We'll compare the baseline model of a new item with a more stable model from a related item in the same customer group to get a better sense of how our new item should look in the future.
In our first example, we'll use the forecast accuracy exception report to find items with a poor forecast relative to the previous period, and then demonstrate how we can examine alternative forecasting methods using the Compare Forecast utility. Here I am in Forecast Pro. First, let's put the forecast from the previous period on the graph so that we can see what we were forecasting before actuals rolled in last month. To do that, I'll go to the graph settings and add previous forecast. And if you don't see it here, you may need to go to add or remove to find your previous forecasts. Now we can see on the graph what we were forecasting last period in blue, as well as what we're forecasting this period in red. Next, I'm going to open the forecast accuracy exception report. I'll sort this report by percent deviation, largest to smallest, and with the absolute values turned on. That's because I only care about the size of the deviation between forecast and actuals, not whether it was too high or too low. Let's select the top item by double-clicking on it. As you can see, the graph adjusts, and this is the item with our biggest percent deviation between forecast and most recent actuals. As you can see, the forecast last period was 381, whereas the demand that just rolled in was 1 unit. That's a percent deviation of over 38,000%, which is pretty bad. And looking at the graph, I happen to know that this item is being phased out. Just look at the last several periods of history. A period ago, the forecast in blue wasn't really capturing that. And even today, the forecast in red, even with its sharp downward adjustment, is too high and still contains residual spikes from historic demand. Let's open the Compare Forecast utility and try some other models. For that, I'm going to go to the Forecasting tab, go over to Data Tools, and press Compare Forecasts. As we said, this will open the forecast report, which will show me the model details, both for my current model and any comparison model I try, as well as the override grid, which shows my statistical numbers in the current model and the numbers for the comparison model. We can see from the forecast report that the current model is exponential smoothing chosen by expert selection, and it's an additive Winters model. First, let's try a different exponential smoothing model, NaCl. Remember, the purple line on the graph is the current model, while the orange line represents the comparison. Looking at the orange comparison line, this one actually doesn't look that great because it's still forcing a seasonal pattern on this item. Instead, let's try a 3-month moving average. To do that, I'll go under More, choose Moving Average, and select 3 for my number of terms. Now, looking at the orange comparison line, this looks a lot better, and it correctly phases out the demand for this item. By clicking on the arrow, I can transfer that comparison model to become the current model. And when I click Exit, that's the model we're going to have. So now it's pretty apparent that while my forecast from the previous period was leading me in the wrong direction, we've settled on a model for the current period here in red that correctly obsolesces this item. And this is a much better forecast that takes into account what I know about this item in my hierarchy.
For our second example, we're going to look for items with outlier spikes, and then use the compare forecast utility to see what modeling those items would look like with or without corrective event indices applied. Let's go back into Forecast Pro. Alright, here I am back in Forecast Pro. Notice that in my settings, I already have outlier detection turned on. So every statistically significant outlier spike will be adorned with a blue indicator, and they'll be pushed onto a list called the outlier report. Let's open the outlier report, and let's look at the second one. Here we have a relatively seasonal item with a flat forecast. And the reason this forecast looks flat is because of one very large outlier spike in the history. Notice that this outlier spike is in December. You can see it's actually a little bit to the left of January. However, this item is normally close to flat in December. And if we look at the year-over-year graph, we can see how much of a problem this data point is and why it might be throwing off our model. As before, I'm going to open the Compare Forecast utility on the Forecasting tab. And this time, we want to try an event index model. I just so happen to have one saved under my event modeling tool right here. And this is an event index model that corrects for a December spike, which is exactly what we want. So let's apply it to this item. See, it gets applied in the comparison field. And after doing that, our comparison looks a lot better. It's capturing the seasonality. It turns out that correcting for that one spike really fixed everything. Let's press the left arrow to make this our current forecast. And then upon exiting the tool, our forecast looks good. For our third example, we're going to find items where the forecast has shifted dramatically from the previous month. Then, we'll use the Compare Forecast utility to try an alternative forecast method by changing the trend. This time in Forecast Pro, I'm going to go to my forecast exception report called Forecast versus Archive. This report allows me to compare previous to current forecasts. I'm going to sort it by deviation. Double-clicking on the top item here, we see it has a strong upward trend based on its last few periods of history. However, maybe I'm skeptical of that trend and would like to see the forecast with the trend removed. I'll open the Compare Forecast utility, and for my comparison, I'm going to choose a custom exponential smoothing model where I'll set the trend to none. So I'll go over to exponential smoothing, choose custom. We see that by default the trend was calculated automatically, but again I would like to see this with the trend removed. So we'll hit OK. And now my current model is the expert selection, which did calculate a trend, but my comparison model is the detrended model. This estimate is less optimistic, but it's more in line with my knowledge about that item, so I want to keep it. So again, I'll press the arrow to transfer this custom model to be my current selection. And then we'll exit. For our last example, we're going to use the compare forecast utility to facilitate forecasting new items, that is, items with little to no history. We'll compare alternate forecasts using a custom component model. So here back in Forecast Pro, the first thing I'll do is go to my item report. And I already have it sorted to show items with just a few periods of history, as we can see here. Let's select the first one. It's only got 2 periods of history, and we can see that on the graph. Because of this, it's also getting a very flat forecast. There's no pattern in this very short history. Let's open the Compare Forecasts utility. I have a few custom component models saved. These models capture the seasonal pattern from an existing item, maybe something that's very stable. Let's apply the seasonal model from the Vitality customer. This now becomes my comparison. Does it look right? Well, looking at my new item, the one with only 2 periods of history, it's actually from Urban Goods, not Vitality. So maybe we want to try the Urban Goods pattern instead. I'll go back to my custom component model and choose Urban Goods. That's a different pattern. And based on my knowledge of the product and the fact that they are distributed to the same customer, that one looks a lot better. So that's the one I'm going to apply. Again, I use the arrow to make that my current model. And then we exit the tool and it's saved. So now, even with a very short history, I'm able to get a sophisticated model on this item. Alright, so what have we covered today?
Alright, so what have we covered today? Forecast Pro is designed to model your historic data accurately and automatically, and it draws from a large variety of models to do so. And expert selection identifies and simultaneously tests multiple models per item at multiple holdout horizons. So in theory, it's not only the best approximation of the history you feed into Forecast Pro, but also is doing more work than a single forecaster ever could. However, there are times when your domain expertise about the seasonality, trend, new product launch profile, or other features of your items allows you to improve your forecast by adjusting the baseline. And the Compare Forecast utility, a new feature in Forecast Pro, allows users to test alternative models, simultaneously visualizing them and seeing the comparative model details and output, and giving them the ability to select and apply the model that fits their needs. So, that covers all the topics for today. Before we move on to questions, a few things. As a reminder, the next webinar in this series is in February and will discuss item level comments. You can find it listed on our website, and we'll post a registration link in the chat. For the upcoming Q&A portion, please use the Zoom chat to post your questions. My colleague James is here to help moderate the Q&A. All right, let's take some questions.